My name is Blanche. And the very next morning after the wedding, while I was still wearing my wedding dress, my mother-in-law showed up with a lawyer, a notary, and a lawsuit file, demanding that I transfer half of the company worth over $30 million to her son, the man who had called me wife for less than 24 hours. They thought I would panic and sign. But they didn't know. I had already met this judge a year ago. Have you ever loved someone so much you were willing to trust them, only to find out what they wanted wasn't you but what you owned? If it were you, what would you do in that situation? Leave a comment below, hit like and subscribe to the channel so you can follow me as I retrace the truth behind my 24-hour marriage, where I hid both my identity and my fortune, and almost lost everything anyway. I wasn't born into wealth. At least no one thought so when they looked at the place where I grew up. A small wooden house tucked in a quiet Oregon suburb, where the white picket fence was peeling, the backyard overrun with weeds, and the doors always shut whenever a stranger walked by. My parents died in a car accident when I was 8. They were on their way home after their 10th wedding anniversary celebration. I had prepared a cake, my grandmother cooked dinner. But that night the police only brought back 2 coats. One brown, one navy. Smelling of gasoline. From then on, I lived with my grandmother, Evelyn, a woman with a modest appearance who had once led a team of circuit design engineers for the Department of Defense for nearly 30 years before retiring to care for her family. But what I didn't know until I was 14 was that my family wasn't poor. On the contrary, we were sitting on a legacy, a secret carefully protected for generations. One winter night, she called me into her study. I had never been allowed inside that room alone before. It smelled of pine wood, and behind an old curtain was a wall safe. She didn't use fancy words. She simply said, "Your great-grandfather, Julius Orion Carter, was the founder of Orion Quantum Systems." I was stunned. You'll understand in time. What you need to remember is that our family doesn't measure worth by watches or cars. We measure it by keeping silent when everyone else can't. Inside that safe were strange documents. Company ownership rights, a list of patents, contracts with federal research organizations. And one special thing, a handwritten blueprint in pale blue ink that read, "Never let wealth become your descendants' weakness." My great-grandfather was a genius inventor, a true eccentric. He lived in seclusion, gave no interviews, never revealed his identity. All assets were placed in a legal structure called the Nested Protective Trust, meaning the assets didn't belong to any one person, but to a network of independent funds, operating under coded rules, with control transferred in parts depending on conditions. Each family member only knew what they needed to know at the right time. I wasn't officially named until my 25th birthday. But from the time I was 16, Evelyn began training me step by step. How to read financial reports, how to listen more than speak, and most importantly, how to walk into a room without anyone realizing I was the one in control. "The truly wealthy don't need to prove it," she said. "And sometimes it's better if no one knows who you are." I began using a different name, Blanche Marie Ellis, in all legal documents, bank accounts, and passports. My real name, Blanche Carter, remained only on my birth certificate and on the handwritten note my great-grandfather left behind. At school, I never spoke of my family background. I took the city bus, wore clothes from discount stores, and paid for college with scholarships and part-time jobs, even though in reality I could have bought the entire dorm building if I wanted. No one I worked with at Orion knew I was the real CEO. I appeared under the title of Systems Administration Assistant, working in a corner on the 4th floor, reviewing contracts and pretending to ask for directions in the very building I was running. It was strange, but I felt safer being the nobody. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to understand everything from the inside before putting myself at the top. Under that cover, I could overhear stories in elevators, gossip in the cafeteria, even meetings that senior directors thought were private, but in truth, were quietly remembered word for word by the girl making their coffee. Sometimes I wondered if I was doing the right thing or just living behind a disguise too thick. But then I remembered my great-grandfather's words, "You don't hide to escape. You hide to protect what matters, your freedom to choose who gets to enter your life." I don't know who he had met that made him write that line. It better than ever. The day I met Daniel Miller, the first man who made me think about lowering the mask. And from that moment, every layer of defense I had built for over a decade began to shake. I met Daniel on a windy Saturday afternoon in Portland, at a children's book fair. I was there as an anonymous sponsor for an educational tech program in underprivileged areas. My name wasn't on the donor board and I liked it that way. I lingered quietly among the pages colored by 8 and 9-year-olds. There was something so genuine in their shaky drawings, in the messy words scribbled. I want to be an engineer so I can fix grandma's machine. And that's when Daniel stayed beside me. That little girl is my student. He pointed at a drawing of the moon with an arm reaching up from a rooftop. I teach history at Jefferson Middle School. But she always dreams of being an astronaut. He spoke with pride and gentleness. Not the kind of gentleness used on purpose, but the unconscious kind, as if life had knocked him down many times, and he chose not to fight back with bitterness. We started talking. Strangely easily. Neither of us tried to impress the other. He didn't even ask what I did for a living until 15 minutes later, and when I answered, I work at a tech company. I handle contracts and investments, he simply nodded. No probing. No suspicion. Our first date was at a cafe near his school. He arrived early, chose a small table by the window, and was reading a book on maritime map history. The second was a hike through Morton Nature Preserve. It rained lightly but we walked for 3 hours. I didn't talk much. But with Daniel I didn't feel the need to in order to be understood. I liked how he never brought up material things. He didn't ask about salary, didn't compare cars, didn't mention what we could do with more money. I liked how he spoke of his students with love, not pity. And I liked how he looked at me as if I were someone to be listened to, not a ticket to somewhere else. But then there was Karen. I met her for the first time on a Sunday evening. Daniel invited me to dinner at her house. A small, tidy home with white lace curtains and family photos filling the hallway. She opened the door with a practiced smile. But from the moment we shook hands I felt something. Daniel says you work in investments. That sounds clever. Her voice was sweet but sharp. Do you rent or own an apartment in the Pearl District? I smiled. Rent. Long-term lease. Ah, so not settling down yet. But these days, everyone has to stay flexible, right? Throughout the meal she kept probing. Not directly, but each question was like a small needle, slipping past the cover looking for a way to pierce through. I spoke very little. Not because I didn't know how to answer, but because I wanted to listen. People like Karen can't hide for long. She asked about my family, where I grew up when my parents died, why I hadn't bought a house yet even though I was old enough to be settled. Family is about coming together, she said, slicing the beef firmly. Not dividing who pays for what. Don't you think so, Blanche? I smiled faintly, my eyes on Daniel. I think each person should know what they're bringing into the relationship. And sharing should be voluntary. Not forced. While washing dishes, I happened to notice a printed sheet, Daniel's teacher's paycheck, placed neatly on the table beside the phone. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Next year, need to apply for housing assistance? That didn't bother me. But the way it was left exactly where I could see it, natural yet not accidental, made me think. A few weeks later I realized Karen had started digging deeper. One morning I walked past the mailbox in my apartment building and saw that someone had opened my mail and resealed it. Not personal mail, but a stock transaction report, sent to an address I only used to maintain legal activity, never for daily correspondence. Only 2 people knew that address, my lawyer and Daniel. I didn't think he was the one who revealed it. But I knew. Someone was trying to trace the part of me I wanted to keep hidden. Late one night while I was entering data for the office, Karen called. For the first time she called me directly, not through Daniel. Blanche, forgive me if I'm too direct. But if you're truly serious about my son, I think you should start being transparent. I sat up straight. Transparent about what, ma'am? Finances. Housing. Debts. I want to be sure Daniel isn't getting dragged into anything he'll have to carry. I kept my tone calm. I understand. But I think those are things 2 people in love should discuss first with each other, not through a third party. There is no third party in family, Blanche. Don't forget, if you marry Daniel, I'll be your mother too. I hung up gently. Said nothing more. But inside one thing was clear. Karen wasn't curious. He was calculating. And I, the one who had been taught not to panic when seeing water leak through the first crack. This was no longer about feelings. It was a chess game. And I needed to prepare my next moves. I don't know what made me return to the kitchen that night. Maybe because I forgot my notebook bag. Or maybe instinct, the one I learned from Evelyn, whispered that something wasn't right. I walked slowly down the hallway of Karen's house, my heels soft as breath. The kitchen light still glowed yellow and false. I heard Karen's voice. Lower than usual, threaded with urgency she couldn't hide. No, she hasn't said anything. But I'm sure there's something. She lives in the Pearl, works in investments, but never once says exactly which company. Not once. Pause. Then she continued, I saw a life insurance policy worth $2 million in her wallet. And that passport wasn't its first use. There's a stamp from Geneva. The person on the other end sounded like a financial advisor. The way she said, asset consolidation, find a marriage lawyer, arrange before signing the marriage license. This wasn't probing anymore. It was planning. She was looking for a way to legitimize access to my assets. I stepped back silently, returned to my car, sat in the dark for over half an hour, not knowing what to do with the dizziness pounding at my temples. A few days later, during dinner at my apartment, Daniel casually let his mother hold my wallet to find a grocery membership card. I didn't notice, busy chopping onions in the kitchen. But when I stepped into the living room, I saw Karen standing with her back to me, holding her phone close to my documents, snapping photos of each side of my insurance cards, passport, and even part of my vehicle registration. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked over and said softly, Did you find the card? Karen jolted, her face flushed. Oh, you left your documents all over. I was straightening them. I smiled, took the wallet from her hand. I'm used to my own mess. But thank you for noticing. That night, after Daniel was asleep, I sat alone in the study, staring at the black screen. I remembered what my grandmother once told me the first time she gave me access to the trust contract my great-grandfather had created. If one day you see someone trying to slip into your life through a door you never invited them through, don't panic. Walk straight to the backyard. Turn on the light. And be ready. I turned on my computer, logged into the Cresswell Adams law firm system, where I had entrusted my assets since I was 25. The next morning I arrived there at 8:30. I want to add a new condition to the Orion Trust, I told Mr. Eugene Harris, the senior lawyer handling my family's file. Block all inheritance rights, asset consolidation requests, or ownership access by any individual who isn't a direct family member, including future spouses, for 10 years after marriage, unless there is written approval from the entire trustee board. Harris didn't ask why. He looked at me for a moment, then said, very much like Evelyn. She requested a similar clause back in 1986. I signed the papers in silence. Copies were stamped, sealed, and archived. The electronic version was encrypted with 2 layers of biometric authentication. I walked out of the office with a changed mindset. That afternoon, I called Naomi Tran, a private investigator who had once worked with Orion's internal security department. I had met her during a personnel investigation years ago, and I knew Naomi could find anything and leave no trace. I need to know every time Karen accesses information about me, contacts lawyers, financial institutions, or uses my personal data. Naomi opened her notebook. Time frame of surveillance? Start 3 months ago. And continue until the wedding. Or until you think it should stop. Do you want me to follow Daniel too? I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then shook my head. Not yet. If there's something, he'll reveal it himself. Naomi was discreet. But before I left the cafe, she placed her hand over mine, her eyes steady. I've met people like Karen. They don't need weapons. They use pity as a blade. And when their son is the shield, it's even harder to see who's striking. From that day on, I started keeping records. Every time Karen called, every time she appeared somewhere unannounced, every question about income, lease agreements, or joint account rights. I didn't confront. Didn't act suspicious. I still attended family dinners with the same calm demeanor as if I knew nothing. I still loved Daniel. And I wasn't sure he knew what his mother was doing. I was not the same woman who once believed love could fix everything. I was the heir to a legacy. And I would protect it by any means, even if the person I needed to protect was myself. I chose a fall wedding in Vermont. No golden wedding hall, no loud live music, no 3-page guest list. Just a small ceremony in the backyard of a cabin, where the maple leaves blazed red above us, and the nearby lake held our last piece of privacy. I wore a thin silk gown. Daniel wore a silver-gray suit, probably the only one he owned. He held my hand, eyes misty as he read his vows. "Blanche," he said, voice breaking, "I don't know why you chose me out of all the choices you had, but if waking up beside you each day is a privilege, then for the rest of my life, I vow to guard it with everything I have." The guests clapped. I smiled. I wanted to believe every word. I truly did. The reception ended early. Guests drifted away, leaving candlelight flickering under the trees and the rustle of dry leaves beneath departing footsteps. Daniel and I returned to the lakeside cabin I had booked for 2 nights before the honeymoon. The small wooden house, the creaking floorboards, the warm stone fireplace, and the wide window reflecting the moonlit water. We drank red wine, kicked off our shoes, sat on the floor, leaning against each other like 2 children exhausted after a birthday party. Daniel pulled me closer, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "I still can't believe you're my wife." I laughed, nestled against his chest. But deep inside, something wouldn't let me relax fully. A vague feeling like seeing a shadow in the mirror, only to turn and find no one there. Daniel fell asleep early, tired after the long day. I stepped quietly to the desk in the cabin where I had left my bag and laptop. I wanted to check for a message from Naomi, the investigator I had hired to watch Karen, because she had promised to update me if anything unusual came up. But when I opened my bag, I froze. The small recorder that always stayed in the innermost zip pocket now burst open. And the battery cover was loose, as if someone had hurriedly put it back after removing it to check. I immediately looked at my laptop. Even though it was password protected with 2 layers, I opened the access log. 1 failed login attempt at 7:42 p.m. 1 successful at 7:43. The IP location matched the cabin. At that time, I was outside in the garden taking photos with friends. Daniel was the only one left inside the room. I sat down on the bed, gripping my phone. As if everything I feared most was quietly walking through the door, right when I chose to trust someone. The next morning, while I was making coffee, Daniel got a call. I close enough to hear Karen's voice through the speaker. "Your car's been vandalized. The mirror's broken, the doors are scratched all over." I called the police. They said you have to go to court to file a statement. As for the cameras, they said I can't view them because the car isn't under my name. Daniel turned to me, flustered. "I have to run back. Mom's panicking. Can you come with me?" I looked at him. His eyes seemed honest, spotless. But those were the same eyes that looked at me last night when he held me close, right after trying to log into my computer. We drove back to the city, arriving at the county courthouse at the address Karen sent. The facade of the building was familiar to me. It was where Orion's lawyer had once invited me to attend a copyright dispute last year. But that meant nothing, until Daniel hurried inside and a woman in a navy suit stepped forward to block me. "Mrs. Miller. I'm Blanche. Call me Blanche. I represent the court. This is a civil summons requiring your presence at a property division hearing requested by Mrs. Karen Miller." I froze. Daniel turned back, his face pale. "What? Mom, what's going on?" Karen stepped out from the left hallway, her hair neatly in a bun, her gray dress crisp, holding a black leather briefcase as if she were heading into a board meeting. "Calm down, Daniel. This is necessary to ensure you're not disadvantaged. We'll make it clear. Before the law." I looked at her, then at Daniel. "Did you know about this?" Daniel shook his head, his face drained of color. "I thought she was only planning to consult a lawyer. I didn't know it was what?" I kept my voice steady. "Didn't know your mother would sue me one day after the wedding to demand division of assets I never agreed to share?" Karen cut in, her voice soft to the point of being fake. "No one wants a dispute, Blanche. But you entered marriage without financial transparency. I want to ensure fairness. A small portion for Daniel. And if possible, for the future of you both." But they didn't know I had prepared for this moment years ago. The clerk serving the summons today had once worked as a legal assistant for my lawyer. And she had called me last night. Courtroom 3 of the Chittenden County Courthouse wasn't large, but that morning, it felt strangely suffocating. Not because of the number of people, but because of the air itself. So heavy that even the sound of tearing paper cut through the silence like a blade. I sat at the defendant's table, civil respondent. Officially, the petitioner was Karen Miller, but the reason was clear: failure to declare personal assets before marriage, and violation of equitable marital sharing principles. Her lawyer, a tall, thin man named Scott Durrell, close-cropped gray hair, spread out a stack of files so thick I heard a mocking chuckle from a court staffer sitting behind me. "We will prove that my client, Mrs. Karen Miller, acted to protect the legal interests of her son, Daniel Miller, who entered marriage with the defendant under conditions of severe asset concealment. While no written contract exists, the parties frequently discussed sharing everything. We consider this an oral contract with legal standing." Daniel sat behind, not beside his mother. His back hunched, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor as if it held the answer to the humiliation he was swallowing whole. The judge entered. A woman with dark skin, naturally silver hair, her stride firm but not harsh. She sat down, opened the file, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she looked up. Her gaze rested on me, and her lips pressed as if holding back something unsaid. "I am Judge Lena M. Rowe. Before we begin, I want both parties to confirm their legal standing and oath of honesty before the court. I am Blanche Marie Ellis, defendant, legal wife of Daniel Miller. I commit to absolute truth. Karen Ruth Miller, plaintiff, representing my son's financial interests." Judge Rowe nodded, then leaned slightly toward me. "Ms. Ellis, I received your counterfiling this morning with a 14-minute recording. Do you have a copy with you?" "Yes, Your Honor." I handed over the USB drive, along with notarized transcripts, all already submitted by my private lawyer, but I brought them to leave no room for delay. Scott Durrell immediately stood to object. "Your Honor, this recording was obtained without consent from all parties, violating privacy rights." The judge didn't even raise an eyebrow. The recording was made in a public cafe with surveillance cameras and ambient audio. Under Vermont law, one-party consent is legal. He turned to me. "Do you confirm you were the consenting party?" "I confirm." The other party was Mrs. Karen Miller. The judge signaled the technician to play the recording. The screen on the wall showed sound waves moving steadily. Then the familiar voice rang out. "I don't need her to love my son. I need her to believe she's lucky to have Daniel. A girl with no family, no reputation. She'll cling to him thinking she hit the jackpot. And once they're married, we'll file for asset consolidation. If she refuses to sign, we'll go public." A male voice responded, "We need solid proof she has assets. And I'll need legal authority from Daniel." Karen's voice again, "I'll handle it. I've copied her insurance, licenses, passport, even the account code she uses for mail. I need you to prepare the contract. I'll take care of the rest." Durrell's face drained. Karen didn't look up again. He sat frozen like stone. I turned to the judge. She spoke softly. "Ms. Blanche. Excuse me, may I ask you something personal?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Is your great-grandfather Julius Orion Carter?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "Yes, that's correct. I've never publicly disclosed that." Judge Rowe smiled, not the polite kind, but the smile of someone reconnecting with a long-buried memory. "I was a senior law student, nearly forced to drop out when my mother had a stroke and I couldn't pay her hospital bills. An anonymous scholarship covered all my tuition and living costs for the last 2 years. Today, when I reviewed your file and saw certain details in the financial structure, I suspected. And now I'm sure." She closed the folder. "I owe your family a debt. But today I sit here not to repay it but to serve justice." She turned to Karen and her lawyer. "The court dismisses the plaintiff's petition in full and refers the recording and related documents to the district attorney's office for review of fraud, attempted asset seizure, and invasion of privacy." She paused, her eyes on Karen a moment longer. "I don't need your apology. But I advise you to prepare for a criminal defense attorney, not a family one." Karen looked bloodless. And Daniel, for the first time since walking in, finally dared to raise his eyes to me. That afternoon, when I returned from court, the sun had slipped behind the pines, leaving a silver haze along the horizon. I didn't drive straight back to the cabin but circled the lake once more. Inside me there was no sense of victory nor relief. Only a fatigue stretching long like a sigh that never made a sound. My phone rang as I was parked outside the door. It was Daniel. I nearly didn't answer. But then I remembered. Some conversations, if not had at the moment they need to happen, will never happen at all. I picked up, not waiting for him to speak. If you're calling to defend your mother, don't. His voice was hoarse, small, like someone dragged out of a stupor. No. I'm not calling to defend her. Just want to see you. Tell the truth. All of it. I stayed silent for a few seconds, then replied, "So where do we meet?" We agreed on a small cafe in Burlington, the same place where we had our very first date before we officially fell in love. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, his head lowered, his hands twisted together as if in prayer. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him without removing my coat, without ordering a drink. Daniel looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. "I knew my mother had a plan to reach your assets. Not the details, not everything, but I knew she suspected. She told me you were hiding something big, and that if we divorced one day without a contract, I'd be left with nothing. And what did you do with that information?" He lowered his head. I did nothing. I told her not to interfere, but I didn't force her to stop either. I thought she was only being overprotective." I nodded slowly. "And what about the fake medical records?" He looked up, startled. "What?" "Your mother submitted to the court a file claiming she had cancer, that she was in treatment again. She declared she needed to protect her son's long-term financial interests because she didn't have much time left. Those records are fake. The hospital confirmed there hasn't been any medical history under her name for the last 7 years." Daniel's face turned pale. I continued, "And the $24,000 debt in your name, borrowed to finance a luxury wedding? She applied for that loan using your name, forged my consent signature to secure a lower interest rate under a joint financial program." He whispered, "Do you have proof?" I placed in front of him a copy of the credit file, what Naomi had sent me 2 days earlier. Every expense, every loan form, all stamped with dates, IP addresses, and even bank camera footage confirming it was Karen who filed them. Daniel didn't read it all. He closed the file, trembling. I knew she was controlling, but I didn't think she'd go that far. I placed my hand on the table, my voice calm. "Daniel, the problem was never your mother. It was that you let it happen." He looked up, wanting to argue, but then stayed quiet, as if he finally understood. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "You didn't need to forge anything. You didn't need to collude. All you had to do was stand still and do nothing, and that alone gave your mother the power to manipulate the system. I loved you, truly, but you didn't stand between me and your mother. You stood behind her and let her push me out." Daniel exhaled as if receiving a sentence. "I was wrong. I know. But I was also afraid. My mom is all I have since my father left. She raised me alone. Taught me to pay bills, cook, call the bank. I owe her everything." I smiled faintly, not mockingly. "And because of that, you let her owe me too." Daniel lowered his head, silent. I got to my feet. "I don't hate you, Daniel. But your silence is something I can't trust anymore." I returned to my loft in Portland on a rainy afternoon, the drizzle thin as smoke. Everything inside was exactly as I had left it, yet when I set the keys on the table, I suddenly felt like a stranger coming back to someone else's home. The wedding dress still hung in the closet. The ring box still open, sitting on the shelf beside a framed photo of 2 people smiling under candlelight. I didn't throw anything away, but I didn't touch them either. I left them there like part of a question I wasn't ready to answer. Daniel called every day. Not begging, just saying, "I'm here if you want to talk." Once he texted, "Today I went home. Really home. Not to live with mom, but to figure out why I let her be my voice all my life." I read it, then turned off the screen. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in pain either. But I needed time to draw the line between what I could forgive and what I would overlook only out of exhaustion. I agreed to meet him a week later at my lawyer's office, where no one could blur or twist my intent. Daniel arrived on time, alone, with no lawyer by his side. He wore an old shirt with sleeves rolled up. No cologne. No wedding ring. His eyes had stopped pleading, now they held awareness. I began first. "I've considered every option, Daniel. Annulment for fraud. Quick divorce for lack of trust. Or another option." I looked up. A temporary separation. Living apart. 3 months. No meetings. No contact. No intermediaries. Each of us living with our own truth. He nodded without hesitation. I agree. No objections. During those 3 months, I continued, you'll live somewhere without your mother. Not the old house. Not meeting her lawyer. You'll go to therapy if you feel the need. I won't force you, but if you simply sit out the 3 months and come back asking, so what now? Then don't bother coming back at all. Daniel nodded slowly. I placed on the table a temporary agreement drafted by my lawyer. The document recorded that for the next 3 months, we would suspend marital life, not declare legal separation, not pursue any legal procedure. I understand why you didn't choose outright, he said, his voice low and slow. Because you don't want to forgive something without knowing if the other person will actually change. I took the signed agreement, slipped it into a folder, and slung my bag over my shoulder. Before leaving, I turned back to him. Daniel, I don't know if we'll still be husband and wife 3 months from now. But if you are someone who steps out from your mother's shadow, someone who dares rebuild himself from the ground up, then I can't promise anything, but I will listen. I didn't go to court the day Karen testified before the district prosecutor. I didn't even turn on the local news that morning, though Naomi texted, Karen has officially been indicted for falsifying financial records and intentional identity abuse. I didn't need to know what she wore walking into the courtroom, or whether anyone escorted her there. The only thing I cared about was this. The court had issued a no-contact order between her and me for 12 months, covering letters, phone calls, intermediaries, and even opinions expressed through media. The law is a language I know well. But with Karen, I never expected the law to reform her. I only wanted her stripped of any access to my life in any form. 3 weeks after the temporary separation agreement began, I received an email with a short subject line. Already started. Sender, Daniel. I opened it. No lengthy words. I've started therapy 2 sessions a week. Rented my own apartment, 3 blocks away from Mom's house. I don't want to give reports. Just want you to know. I haven't called you because you didn't allow it. But one thing. If I want to start over, not in marriage but in a career, would there be a path at Orion for someone like me? For the first time, he wasn't asking for special treatment. Not mentioning because of you. Asking whether he, on his own, without anyone shielding or speaking for him, had a place. The next morning, I called Andres, Director of Human Development at Orion. I want to reopen the project coordination assistant position at the training center. He was surprised. That's an entry-level role. You once removed it because it wasn't needed. I nodded. Now it's needed. The first applicant is a high school teacher. 2 weeks later, Daniel walked into the Orion building wearing a pressed blue shirt, neatly cut hair, and carrying a portfolio. He didn't look around much. Didn't rush to the reception desk. I watched him through the first-floor camera, a habit I'd kept since my days as the nameless girl checking the hallways. When I invited him up to the meeting room on the 7th floor, he walked in straight-backed, not avoiding my gaze. Hello. Thank you for giving me this meeting. I'm not the one directly hiring, but I am the one who decides who gets to step into the spaces close to Orion's heart. I pulled out a 3-page packet from the folder, clipped neatly, and handed it to him. This is the test. He took it, blinking slightly. A test. 3 parts. 1. HR scenario. 2. Conflict resolution simulation within a training group. 3. Write a proposal to improve 8th graders' skills with a budget under $1,000. All based on real cases at Orion. Daniel smiled faintly. I thought you'd ask, why do you want to work here? I looked him in the eye. I don't need to know what you want. I need to know what you can do. He nodded. Fair. You have 2 hours. If you need sticky notes, markers, or a tablet, just ask. He didn't ask anything else. Picked up the pen and began writing. I stepped out, leaving the door ajar behind me. I didn't know whether he'd do well or not. But for the first time, I saw Daniel in a space without his mother, without me, without any title to shield him. Just him and himself, sitting before questions a real man wouldn't avoid. Under the soft morning sunlight, the bright curtain was pulled up in the courtyard of an old building renovated into a learning and counseling center. Above, carved wooden letters stood out. Orion Foundation, reclaim your worth. I found myself in the stone-paved courtyard. flanked by rows of newly carved wooden benches, each one meant for those who once thought they had no second chance. They sat there, some in worn shirts, some still carrying the hesitance of survivors of silent battles. But their eyes lit up. Hope. Life. I adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath. Behind me, the Orion blue sign swayed gently in the breeze. I once thought that if someone looked at my bank statement to judge my worth, then I would never be enough. To be loved, to be trusted, to keep moving forward. I caught the eyes of a middle-aged woman with weary yet determined eyes, and I knew she understood every word. But then I learned something. No one gets to define your worth, except you. I signaled, and 2 volunteers pulled away the white cloth covering the first row of benches. Words carved deep into oak appeared, like a declaration that time or control could never erase. No one gets to price your worth, except you. In the distance, Daniel was waiting at the back of the courtyard. No longer in a polished suit or with the arrogant eyes of the man I once left at the airport. He wore a simple polo holding a stack of files, a name tag pinned to his chest. Intern, Daniel Walker. Exactly as required for any trainee. We hadn't spoken much in recent months. But each morning I saw his name on the early arrivals list. No long emails, no excuses. Only presence. Quiet listening. And sincere questions during training sessions. How do we avoid unintentionally recreating control patterns when we think we're helping others? I once thought if I met him again, I'd have 100 questions waiting for answers. But standing here I realized some answers only arrive when the need to ask has faded. That afternoon, back at the office, I opened my laptop to check the flood of emails in Orion's public inbox. Amid subject lines like, "Thank you for today's ceremony," and "I want to enroll in the support program," one name stood out. Karen Walker. I opened it. I don't expect forgiveness. I know I destroyed a lot. But today, seeing Daniel like that, humble, focused, unflinching, I realized, maybe it wasn't me who changed him. Maybe he's learning to live without my influence. Thank you for not letting me ruin his life. Karen. Someone who once tried to manipulate my life in every way had now chosen to speak truth, without being forced. No effort to regain anything. No demand for forgiveness. I didn't reply. Some responses don't need to be written. They only need to live on through the choices we make each day. I stepped out of the office, walked around the small new campus. In the garden, a group of learners was discussing with a mentor. When does a relationship become financial manipulation? Words like emotional dependency, debt shame, hidden control echoed. I didn't interfere. They were finding the answers themselves as I once had to. Have you ever felt like me, that sometimes, to hold on to yourself you must dare to stand alone? I no longer seek recognition from those who belittled me. I don't need apologies from those who chose silence when I needed them most. I choose to rewrite the meaning of family in my own way, with people who listen, who heal, and who never use love as a tool of control. And what about you? If you've ever been judged by numbers, treated as a burden, or had to rise again on your own after a broken marriage, then you know how it feels. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your story deserves to be heard too. And if you want to keep walking with me through journeys of rebirth, healing, and rebuilding what's good, don't forget to follow the channel. We'll meet again in the next stories, about women who dare to step out of the shadows and light their own lives.